Greetings and welcome to the ROI Clear podcast. My name is Ray Hightower, and today we are fortunate to have as our guest Dr. Terrie Schauer. Terrie is the author of the book Mindful Landlord. She is the owner of Terrie Schauer Incorporated, based in Montreal, Quebec, in Canada. She holds a Ph.D. in communications. She is an accomplished martial artist, having won a world championship in jiu-jitsu. So I'm looking forward to speaking with her today. Welcome, Dr. Terrie Schauer. Welcome, Terrie.
Thank you, Ray. I'm glad to be here.
Glad to have you here. Glad to have you here. Well, to kick things off, I'm going to ask you to give us an elevator pitch, and I'll say this for those who are new to the ROI Clear podcast. Terrie's on an elevator with someone she wants to influence. So, Terrie, we will ask you, what would you say to that person in the course of an elevator ride?
Am I introducing myself, or am I trying to give them a pep talk?
You're introducing yourself. Let's say you're meeting them for the first time on the elevator.
Sure. Okay. So the hat that I've worn for most of my career is a property manager. I started when I was 19 years old, and I'm now wearing more of the investor's hat. And in the last few years, I've become more interested in coaching. And I wrote the book called The Mindful Landlord about importing more mindfulness into the real estate field, which is something I feel like our industry is sorely lacking.
Yes, yeah. And I enjoyed your book. I reviewed it on Amazon. I also have it on my blog. And there's some things that I'd like to explore in the book, if you don't mind. Certainly, you're a landlord, you're a business leader. You've been doing property management since you were 19 years old. We'll ask our listeners to imagine what they were doing when they were 19 years old. Some of them may have been property managers, but I imagine the vast majority were not. And so you certainly showed a lot of maturity. What is it? Let's get back to the book, certainly. What is it that motivated you to write the book Mindful Landlord?
Yeah, so I earlier on in my life, I had some challenges with actually an anxiety disorder when I was in my mid 20s. And part of what was instrumental in getting me out of that was a mindfulness practice. And so mindfulness is not to be confused with mindset. I think in the business world, we talk a lot about mindset, which is everything like, affirmations, structuring your day, time management, all that kind of stuff. That is not mindfulness. Mindfulness is how you use your mind, how you optimize your consciousness for, I say in real estate, profit and peace of mind.
Hmm.
Um, and so for me, like, in when you start coaching people and you start having these conversations about investing, I realize that maybe 80% of the conversations I have with people are not, you can't solve it with a technical argument or a technical knowledge of what you should do as a real estate investor. It's like dieting, right? Like somebody who
Yeah.
goes to see a nutritionist, like anybody can give you a diet plan. You can go on Instagram and buy like a $40, diet plan from any influencer you want to follow. But that's not actually what's going to change your life. What's going to change your life is what's happening between your ears, and that's not something that it's not technical knowledge you will learn in a real estate industry stuff, right? Just like if you go see a nutritionist, they're not going to your diet. Because for me, this mindful so powerful to over panic ended her life. Then to get into business, to end up, winning a few world titles in jiu-jitsu, to really having to writing the book, to doing all these things that I was able, I have a long CV with a lot of interesting data points on it, but that's really due to adopting this methodology, which can be used for success. It can also just be used to make your life look more like what you want it to look like.
Mindfulness came first, and then, as you describe it, the interesting resume, or the resume with many interesting data points, came second. But
Absolutely.
mindfulness came first. And you went through something. You said you were a property manager first when you were 19, and then in your mid 20s, you went through some things with anxiety, and mindfulness is what pulled you out of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Because like I think if you so I mean the good thing with an anxiety disorder as far as like a mental health goes is it's one of the easiest things to address. And one of these sort of prescriptions that you get if you start delving into this and you want to deal with anxiety is to develop a mindfulness practice. And so part of that has to do with meditation, but part of it also has to do with just understanding how your consciousness functions, and that when the anxiety reaction starts to take over, it's because you're moving into like a different type of consciousness, and you can learn how to sort of dial that back. I started, that's why I started practicing meditation. That's why I learned about mindfulness. But then once I opened the door to that, I was like, wow, this is so powerful. It's like an amazing performance tool as well. So let me use it to get the life I want.
Yes. That is, I'm really impressed with that path, and let me tell you why. And if I start to get in an area that is too sensitive, stop me or whatever. But I need to ask you some questions here that I've never asked another guest before. Typically, here in the United States, you're in Canada, I'm in the United States. I don't know if it's this way in Canada, but here in the United States, if someone is dealing with anxiety, the first step here in the States is to prescribe them drugs, because the pharmaceutical companies make money by prescribing drugs, not by encouraging discipline and mindfulness. And I need to ask you, how did you choose the path of mindfulness as opposed to the path of prescribed pharmaceuticals?
Oh yeah, and really like thank you for this question. I really think there needs to be more transparent conversation about that, and definitely like Canada is in the same sort of boat as the US with this. So I'll tell you very openly how this went. So like, I was kind of in my mid-20s. I was a bit lost. I was, deciding whether I'm going to go to grad school, and I had a bad relationship, and like all of those things kind of came together. Um, to form the context in which I developed this panic disorder. And so the first
Mm,
thing I did was like I couldn't leave the house. So like I was became agoraphobic, which is like you're afraid of to be around people, you're afraid to be in public. And I went to see obviously the doctor. And so then the first thing they did was give me a prescription for antidepressants, and I looked at it and I was like, oh no, 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 like no, no,
yes.
no, this is not what we're doing, right? I had some friends actually. It's crazy that like because that was I'm 45 now, so that's 20 years ago. So like at that point, I already had friends who had been prescribed with antidepressants, and like it wasn't a story that I liked. It also like tipped me a little bit into this pool of somebody who's dysfunctional, right? And you have a disorder, and now you need to go and get medication for your mental disorder, and so
Mm,
so I'm like, no, I'm not doing this. Then my next reaction was, okay, let me go talk to someone, right? Like let me go see a psychologist. That also wasn't the best experience. I think I was young and didn't really understand that there are different schools of thought in psychotherapy. um, and the person who I spoke to uh, really actually set me back by taking me down some paths that like were not super useful. And then I was like, okay, let me try to. I was in grad school, so I did have a practice of like reading and researching.
mm,
So I'm like, okay, let me. This must be a thing. Let me go and see what books I can find. And so I found this really great book called Anxiety, Panic, and Phobias by I think it's Purfoy. I'm not going to get the author's name right, but that book in 2 months cured the anxiety disorder. So like just by following the chapters step by step and implementing every single thing, I was like back to functional within 2 to 3 months of reading that book.
we need to make sure we include that in the show notes. We will. We'll
Yeah.
include a link to that book in the show notes.
Yeah.
So
And
throughout,
then
oh, go ahead, please continue.
no, and then like I think there's like one chapter in there where there's like a story about resources. And like one of the resources was like, we don't teach meditation, but maybe you want to learn how to meditate because developing a meditation practice will like lower the way anxiety works. Like you have like a general bar of anxiety in your life, and then every time you have like a panic attack, it's like takes you over it. So if your bar of anxiety is like very high, it's every little thing will set it off. And so, how do
Hmm.
you lower the general bar of anxiety? Well, you do things like eat properly, sleep enough, exercise, and meditate. And so then I
Mm.
just discovered meditation. I read Dan Millman's Way of the Peaceful Warrior. And then that opened like a whole window onto the fact that there's this whole group of people who like practice this, bring it into kind of a more Western format.
Mm-hmm.
And so then like I really like went hard down that rabbit hole, and like it sounded like a little bit evangelical, but like I really like reconfigured my personality. It took me about a year, but I
Mm-hmm.
went from being, very shy, not socially awkward, kind of not daring to act on what my dreams were, to like just the flower opened, and it was really by beginning to understand all of these negative mental habits that I had been basically like keeping me in a box. So,
This is an amazing story for a couple of reasons. First, if we go back to the very early part of the story, you were diagnosed with this anxiety disorder. A physician prescribed you some drugs. You read about them. This is pre-grad school too. You read about them and said, no, I'm not going to do this. You end up going to a psychologist. That took you backwards, you felt. And in each case, the pattern I see is Terrie Schauer questions authority. And I think that's a beautiful skill to have, because if you had not questioned the authority, you never would have discovered mindfulness, and you never would have been able to solve the problem within 2 months of reading the book that you mentioned. And I think it's important. One big lesson that I'm taking away from this interview, and that I hope our listeners take away from this interview, is that there is a time and a place to question authority. Just because someone has credentials doesn't mean you just have to accept the prescription they're giving you. Just because they have credentials doesn't mean you have to accept what they're telling you as a psychologist or whatever. Sometimes you have to go out and find your own book and dig into it. And you mentioned you found a community of people who practice mindfulness as well. I think you said the way of the peaceful warrior. Am I remembering
yeah,
that
yeah,
correctly?
yeah.
Yes. These are valuable lessons. And this all happened before you really took off as a real estate investor, before you became a world champion jiu-jitsu, before you even began jiu-jitsu,
Mhm.
before all of that.
Yeah, before everything, because like I was not able to take the first steps on any of those journeys, like and this
Yes.
tell the story I think in more detail in the book, but I think I was 25 or 26 when this happened, and I was teaching second language English, which was like kind of a not a very glamorous student job at like 7 a.m. in the morning and like some of the francophone hospitals, and I had my students do this task where their exercise was to write down, if you could like had a magic wand and you could make your life look like anything you wanted to, what would it look like? And they're like, okay, we'll do this, but you do it too, so you write it on the board. So like then I turn around and like it's 7 in the morning, my filter is not in place, so I'm like, what do you want to do? Okay, world champion martial artist, real estate investor, business owner, and I'm writing this stuff on the board, and I'm like, oh boy. Like it was the first time that I allowed myself to put that out into the world and be like, no, this is actually what I want to do with my life. Like, how is it that I'm in grad school doing something that I'm not aligned with? Like, why am I hiding from this calling, right? And so
Yes.
then you look at yourself and you're like, okay, well, I am right now, I am here, and in order to be able to own that life, I have to be here, right? Like I have this huge gap to cross, and so who do I have to become who can who can have that life, right? Like be to have. Who do I have to
Mhm.
become? Who do I have to
Right.
show up as so that those things can happen for me? And then that's when I was like, right, okay, now let me get out the shovel and figure out how to do that. But that was like kind of an aha moment where for the first time I really like let myself actually feel what I wanted, And
Hmm.
I think for a lot of people, like if we're so used to living trapped by everybody else's expectations, trapped by like what our school, our parents, our communities told us we had to be when we were 16 years old, like you don't even let yourself have your dreams. Like maybe they are there, it's a dream, but it seems so unrealistic. You don't even allow yourself to feel what it would feel like to want that for real.
Right. Right.
I went off topic, but it was
No, no, this is totally on
yeah.
topic. And here's why it's on topic. What you're telling us, things where you're going down a path, and by going down a path, you realize that you need to be on a separate path. You were teaching an ESL course, English as a second language course, while you were in grad school, gave your students an assignment, and they said, well, teacher, you do the assignment too, and do it in front of us. And because your students challenged you, you discovered some things that are in your heart, in your desire, that you were not aware of.
Absolutely.
That tells us, I think the lesson we take away from that is we never know when we're walking down a path that is really taking us where we need to be. That's number one. And number two, sometimes the people that we're supposed to be leading or mentoring, they turn around and mentor us.
Yeah.
So that's rich.
Yeah.
Wow, there's so much here. We haven't even begun to talk about real estate, but that's
Okay.
good. You know what? We're talking about life. This is all directly related to life and to business and all of this. So, okay, so you're in your mid-20s, you're 25, discover the anxiety issue. You deal with that through mindfulness. You said it took you a year to do that and deal with that. And then you start jujitsu. What prompted you to begin studying jujitsu?
Well, actually, I'm gonna just be very like a real girl. I mean, I had a boyfriend who did jujitsu, and I was kickboxing at the time.
Yes,
And I was like, okay, well, I want us to like have an activity that we do together. So like, let me sign up for jujitsu, and then like me and my boyfriend are gonna be able to do that when I'm not kickboxing.
yes.
And then I got hooked.
Yes, yes, yes. That's how you grew up. That's wonderful how you got roped into it. And so you're still actively training right now.
Well, not right now. I'm actually 8 months pregnant, so I'm
Oh,
not doing a whole lot of anything other than the
yeah,
elliptical.
yes, yeah.
But yeah, when the baby comes out, I'm gonna go back to jiu-jitsu.
I remembered that. I didn't put two and two together with the
Yeah.
logistics and shifted center of gravity, probably different energy levels and all of that stuff. So that's all going on. That's wonderful. Now, when did you decide that you wanted to be an author? You're the author of Mindful Landlord, and we will link to the book in our show notes. When did you decide you wanted to be a landlord? Was it during that the challenging time with your ESL students, or was it after that? And when did you decide?
Okay. So I'm gonna tell this story, like, and for your audience, like, I think this is a moment to listen up because so I knew from the time I was 8 or 9 years old that I wanted to be an author. I had like a serious reading addiction. Like I used to, get my mom. At one point my mom stopped buying me books. She's like, "It's too expensive. You read too much. Like, here's a library card. Like, go get books from the library." And so like when I stopped wanting to be an astronaut, it was to be like, okay, I want to be an author. And I knew that when I was like less than 10 years old. And
Hmm.
then you know what I did? Then everybody told me you can't make any money. That's never going to happen for you, so go to grad school, study something you don't necessarily care about that much, and then you can write, but it's going to be academic papers, and that's going to be how you manifest that, right? Yeah. And so, like,
Wow.
I drank that up until I was 25, 26 years old. And that was why I went to grad school. It was because I wanted to be an author of like my own books, but I did not believe that I could do it.
Yes.
Yeah. So the thing to take away there is that like inside of yourself, I think we all have those dreams that we had when we were 8 or 9 years old. And then, this is like Paulo Coelho, The Alchemist, right? Like
Hmm.
we forget them. Like you have a personal legend, and then at some point you put that away and you forget it. And then in adult life, it's like you have to kind of go back and discover like what is that really for me? Like what am I called to do before I leave this planet? And
Hmm.
part of the mindfulness thing for me was then to like, take out the archaeologist tools and dust off those dreams, and be like, okay, no, actually I'm on this path that's not the right path for me, but I feel like I need to be doing something else. And then the energy level you get to pursue those things, like it had nothing to do with the way I was pursuing the rest of my life. So you unlock all of this potential when you're really, 100% aligned with what you're doing. And then, well, like real estate for me was like, I don't want to say more of like an afterthought, but it was more of a vehicle. And so when I was in school,
Hmm.
undergrad, I read Rich Dad Poor Dad. And
Yes.
I wasn't at a point in my life where that really had meaning for me yet. Like I was doing some property management on the side, but like I wasn't thinking, um, you know, financially supporting myself yet. But there was like a
Mhm.
little sort of a benchmark, like a little tag that got put in to say, no, I'm never getting a real job. Like when I
Yeah.
finish school, I'm never going to get on the rat race train and do that. And like our version of the 401k is called RRSPs in Canada, like calculate how much money I'm going to put in my RRSPs and like live for
Yes.
retirement. Like my actual like my boyfriend at the time came from an accounting family, and they were super into this, and he was 22 years old and talking about like his retirement savings plan, and I was like, no, 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 this is not what's going to happen. So I don't know what I'm going to do with this, but one day I'm going to come back
Yes.
to this. And
Yes.
then when I was 26, after I went through my mindful thing, I went to see dad, and I was like, Dad, I've been managing properties for 5, 6 years now. Let's buy one. Like
Yes.
I have this track record. I've been doing this. And then that's what happened. And then dad co-signed a mortgage and lent me a down payment. And then we owned a triplex, and that's how the investment journey began.
That is, yeah. Yeah. And it goes back again to mindfulness. After you came through the mindfulness journey, then you looked around, you could see resources and opportunities, and you were able to jump on that.
Stuff that I would never have dared to do before. I think like I had the pieces were all lined up, but to actually make the puzzle, that
Yeah.
the mindfulness thing had to happen. And then all of a sudden I was started like putting the puzzle pieces together. And then what became really beautiful was, that first property did so well that turned into a second property and a third property. And then
Hmm.
this is another, kind of a nugget for the audience is that 10 years later, those 9 doors, so 3 properties, 3 triplexes, gave me financial freedom. So I
Yes.
became financially free with 9 doors, not
Oh,
a
yes.
hundred doors, not 1,000 doors, but 9 doors plus 10 years. And then that's what really gave me the freedom to be able to pursue, the athletic career I had at the level that I pursued it. Because
Mhm.
if you want to spend 3 hours in the gym, you need to have something that's going to allow you to do that. And if you have a full-time
Yes.
job plus, training full time, it's not going to like, it's very difficult, very, very difficult to make that happen.
Right.
So real estate was like a phenomenal vehicle to then facilitate the rest of my life.
How often are you able to share your mindfulness journey with your colleagues, for people who work on your team, or partners, or vendors or anything like that? How often are you able to have a discussion with them about this?
Well, I mean, usually what happens is people meet me and then they discover I wrote a book, and then they're like, "Oh, Terrie, I'll pick up your book." And then like some people in the industry have podcasts, they have books, like so you pick this up, and then they'll come back to me, they'll read it, and then like a month or two later, they're like, "Whoa,
Yeah.
Terrie, I had no idea."
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
Um, so it doesn't come up all that much unless I have someone who comes to talk to me and is, open and vulnerable about a specific mental challenge that they're going through. And that doesn't happen a whole lot. Like I think in our industry, there's a real tendency to want to project strength and success at all times.
Mhm.
And
Yes.
I do my best. I MC events. I have a podcast, and I really do my best in those venues when I'm in front of people to just encourage people to be vulnerable and to be real about stuff. And so,
Right.
once in a while, someone will come up to me after a talk, or will have listened to an episode of my podcast, the Real Estate Investors Club podcast, and be like, "Oh, Terrie, like, yeah, you're right. We need more of that." And
Hmm.
I'm like, "Yeah, we need more of that." But it's not something that comes up a lot, I feel like, in what we do.
Okay. Got it. Wow. We are, believe it or not, we're coming towards the end of our time together. And I'm grateful for this. I mean, we talked a little bit about real estate, but we talked more about that foundation that underlies your real estate career and your athletic career and your academic career and your authorship career, all of that. And I think that's very, very important. So personally, I'm getting a lot out of this, and I believe our listeners will too. So I'm grateful to you for all of that.
Hmm.
As we wrap up, I've got to ask you, what is it that you're reading right now, or what do you listen to? How do you sharpen Terrie Schauer's saw?
Yeah. Um, let me answer that, and then I'm just going to go back to what you said previously and like make a little link there. So what I'm
Yes.
reading right now, actually, I decided that 2023 for me is the year when I work on personal relationships.
Ah.
So I really didn't, I've spent all my whole life working on performance, and I
Hmm.
kind of got to where I want to be in a lot of facets. I'm also, having a baby, and so that means that certain aspects of my performance life have to take a back seat. I'm not going to be breaking any marathon records this year.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
And so I'm reading right now actually a French book about communication by someone called Jerome Delude. I'm not sure if it's
Hmm.
translated into English, but it's really, really a great book. It's somebody who researched like I guess the methodology for communicating effectively.
Yes.
So that's kind of what I'm working on. But just to get back to the links between, mindfulness and real estate, or, you know, what goes on in your mind and your real estate career. Like I want to again come back to the aspect of dieting, right? Like
Mm.
we all know enough about nutrition and dieting, I think, or else that information is so easily available that it's a joke. Real
Yeah.
estate is the same thing. It's not difficult to get yourself real estate education. What is difficult is to give yourself permission to take the steps you need to take to step into the peer group and network and put yourself out there. That's hard, man. It's
Mm.
hard to do that. And you're only going to be able to do it from a solid mental position. For me, that came through mindfulness. I'm not saying that's the only thing, but this game is 80 to 90% mental and
Mm.
10 to 20% technical. And you're going to get way more results from working on the mental side of it than you will from, a specific technical issue. It's like, okay, call the person who has that information. It's not difficult to get information. It's
Right.
extremely difficult to set yourself up mentally properly. So,
Hmm. It's not difficult to get information, but it is difficult to take action.
100%.
Wow. And so, and then going back to the beginning, what you just shared, communication, reading a book on communication. So your advice is learn French and read Jerome Leduc's book. Did I get his name?
Delude.
Delude.
No,
Leduc,
delude. No,
Delude. Got it
no,
back.
no, no, no. My advice is don't neglect your personal relationships in
Yes.
how can I say a quest for performance. I think like I've been guilty of that, and if there's one aspect of your life that is not up to the level of the others, it is what will drag you down. Like you're as strong as
Yes.
your weakest link, and I think for me, again, if I'm just being totally transparent, like lacking the same level of skills that I have in everything else, like I lack those skills in that department, and so I was like, all right, 2023, enough.
Right, right,
Let's
right.
spend some time on that. Yeah.
Okay. Yes. In your quest to perform, do not neglect your personal relationships. Got it. Well, and Terrie Schauer, at the end, how can people get in touch with you? I know that everyone's going to be fascinated with you. How can people get in touch with you? And yeah, what's the best way to reach out to you?
Sure. So my social media of choice is LinkedIn. So you can just find me Terrie Schauer on LinkedIn, and then you'll end up kind of in my ecosystem. The other
Yes.
two things that I obviously are close to my heart. So the book Mindful Landlord, available on Amazon, and my podcast, if you want to hear me on a weekly basis, the Real Estate Investors Club podcast.
Excellent. Thank you for all of those. We'll be sure to include those in our show notes. Terrie Schauer, it has been a pleasure speaking with you today. Thank you for your time and for sharing your story and your wisdom.
Thanks, Ray.